Hello, hello. Welcome back for those that have done some of our other lessons so far in the course. For those that are jumping in for this one first, hi, my name is Kristen. Nice to meet you. Part of the ADVizE team. ADVizE stands for a data visualization experience for pre-service teachers. And here we're going to jump in to think about how we created or how we can create space and time and opportunity to explore, visualize, revise when we're working with data that someone else has already collected. So professionally collected data, we're accessing it through online data portals or data tables that are published, things like that. What do we do? How do we create space for that? And I think it's important to sort of think of it like step back, and as we're stepping into this, be like, well, why? Why do we want to create space and opportunity for our students to access, explore, revise, visualize these kinds of data? And so often in our K-12 classrooms, and therefore also in our teacher prep classrooms, we have a lot of student collected data, or at least we talk about student collected data in our teacher prep or pre-service teacher programming. And there are a lot of great benefits from it. Like, what can you think about? What are some of the benefits of collecting your own data? You got a couple? Some things I can think of is you have ownership, you have understanding, you collected those data values. Typically, you have interest in the data that you are collecting. Typically, not always, not every student, but there's a bit more of that tangible, like I can touch it. I was the one that read the instrument. I was the one that asked that survey question. I was the one that collected that, ladybug count from our school garden. All of those different things. But there are also some limitations about the kind of questions we can ask or what we can say or what we cannot say from data that we've collected. So for those that did the lesson in the last module where you collected your own data, just pause and think like, what can you say from the data that you collected? And also just as importantly, what can you not say? What do you not have data to support or refute or investigate about the system, the phenomenon, whatever your testable question was about? Because it turns out when we're working with student-generated data or student-collected, learner-collected data, it limits the scope of what can go into our data sets by the time frame on which we can collect the data. So, for example, like we can't ask questions from student-collected data about geologic time or large geologic timeframes or large spatial scales, because we're also influenced by what space that we can actually physically get to collect those data. And so when we think broadly about natural science, social science, technology, engineering, math, like it actually is a pretty small realm under which our K-12 students or even our pre-service teachers can be collecting data on, just because we're limited in time, space, and resources. So that begs the question of like, well, where can we find other data to use? And fortunately, we live in an incredible time. It's part of us being in this data-driven time of history is that we have access to lots of online data portals of ways that we can find information. So we can find visualizations put out by different scientists. Like we worked a bunch with some NASA scientists and NASA subject matter experts. So we have their visualizations. We can get in and find their data tables. We can get in and look at, access their real data. They're up there in so many different ways. And it can feel pretty quickly like super overload. Like there's so many different things going on. What's a KMZ file? What's a CSV? How do we work with all these different things? Do we need to bootstrap? Are we using GitHub? Blah, 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 blah. All these terms, they can be really overwhelming if we're not used to, conversant, comfortable of working with, larger scale data sets or accessing, jumping into these data portals. But there's a real opportunity for our pre-service teachers to be able to bring in data that their students don't have to collect, right? Because we can look at data, we can ask questions across different time scales, different spatial scales, with different resources that their school might not have in their future schools. And so we want to kind of sidestep or prevent, turn away before we get to this cognitive overload and think about, okay, how can we do this in a reasonable manner? So we put together an online data portal of a variety of different online data, like places online that you can go and access data that are relevant to K-8 topics and different pieces like that. Is this list exhaustive? No, not at all. Please download it, add to it as you go, data portals that you're familiar with, all of the different things. As you find more, as you keep working and building in this work of bringing more real world data to your pre-service teachers, add to it. But we built this and we crowdsourced this over the different participants that have been participating over the last few years of data portals that they found really helpful, that their pre-service teachers were interested in exploring and finding data from within. So we want to provide that for you because that's a really great place to start, is to think of like, okay, what's the general topic I'm interested in? Where might I find that? What might the source of those data be? And then how can I go and access it? Now, not all data portals are friendly for all of our students, right? Most of our data portals are built by scientists and engineers for professional scientists and engineers, but they are required. If tax dollars went into developing those data, collecting those data, then they need to be made publicly available. So at our federal and our state levels, as well as many universities and research-based institutions make their data publicly available, which is fantastic. We just need to remember they're making them available. That doesn't necessarily mean they're accessible for our students. And one might even argue like, I'm not sure a kindergartner needs to get into an online data portal, but how fantastic for a kindergarten teacher to get into a data portal and pull some of the data down for their students to be able to look at. So a lot of the work as we were going through this project and thinking about using and interfacing with our online data portals is we continually had this conversation of like, would we have our students do this? You know, our future students, classroom students? Maybe not, depending on how old they are. But could we, as future teachers in the classroom, get in, access some of this, pull in creative visualization for it to share with our students? Absolutely. Because we can read and make sense of visualizations before we can execute and make them ourselves. So there are these two dynamics, two components going on. You can build from the data portals that we put into that list of resources, or go find your own, because as I said, I mean, that is not exhaustive. There are, I don't know, 30, 40 or something data portals that we have in there, because those are the ones that came up with the faculty that we've been working with over the last couple of years. But you have your own interests and your own focus and your own, you know, sort of desire and asks that your pre-service teachers are going to make. So just some things to think about as you're going out and looking at online data portals and considering, is this one that I could use? Is one, look for ones that are focused on open data or open science, that they're focused on making them publicly available and they have the documentation and the metadata around how were they collected, who collected them, and who funded the research going in, so that you can know, sort of eyes open, jumping into a data set where this originally came from, because you didn't collect it. You don't have that ownership piece like we were talking about with the learner generated data. The other one to think about is sort of the FAIR acronym and thinking about a FAIR data set. And so that is, it's findable, it's accessible, it's interoperable, and it's reusable. And this is a structure that many of our agencies and institutions and universities are using as they're putting up their data portals to ensure that the rest of us could come in and use them. Now, again, is a kindergartner going to be able to do it? No, they don't have necessarily the skills of thinking about how to do it. Or I should say, not every kindergartner. Maybe there's a kindergartner out there. I'm sure there is. But they're trying to use these metrics and these requirements as they're putting them out there. So just to also say, like, they're getting better and better as these data portals go forward of creating the documentation and the surrounds and the supports and how they're organized to make them better so that the rest of us can find them, access them, interpret or like use for a different purpose and be able to reuse them. So thinking about that FAIR acronym can also be helpful. So you need, first step is Find a data set, identify what data you're interested in. What location, what time frame, what variables, pick a question, find a data set to play with it. You can go from one of the data portals in the list. You can go from an online data portal that you have already been using and are really comfortable and conversant with, doesn't matter. But in order to play around and sort of have this firsthand experience, you need some data. And you need to think about, well, what kind of data do you want for a question or an area of interest that you have? And then many online data portals have a quick graph feature, meaning you can create a graph quickly of different variables. You can toggle them on and off, or you can drag and drop. They're all a little bit different with a different flavor. And that's really meant to be just sort of like a quick look at what data are you selecting from that portal and get a sense of, are there missing data components, different pieces like that, so that you can sort of tweak and adjust what data you're accessing, what data you're asking for before you get the data file downloaded. Now, I should say this quick graph is not necessarily meant to be a place where you do your exploration in the data. It's really just meant to be a like quick look, because it's hard to look through lots and lots of numbers in a spreadsheet, especially the more variables that we have in the columns, things like that. So, but use it, leverage it if that's in the data portal that you are using. Then you need to download your data set once you figure out all those different pieces and organize the data to graph it. Remember, we talked about that data organization, and sometimes the way it's organized when we collect it is not necessarily the way that we want it organized in order to be able to visualize the data. So prepare the data to get it ready for visualizing. And then, dun, 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 you guessed it, if you did module 2 with us where we collected our own data, we want to make a graph of it or a visualization of it. It can be a chart, it can be a plot, it can be a map, but we just want to be able to visualize a quick initial data exploration visualization of the data that you accessed. You can, again, lean into the analog, and we did that often with most of the faculty that implemented of a like, analog is good for early data exploration. But also, graphing technology is really important to use as we're going through. And sometimes when we're accessing these online data portals, they can be pretty big data sets. And so they're not necessarily something we want to do in analog. We don't want to have, 4,000 data points visualized with sticky notes. But it can be pretty easy in one of our graphing technologies. So whichever approach you want to take, digital or analog, make an initial visualization of your data as it relates to something you're curious about, something you want to explore in these data. So pause the video, make your visualization, then come back. Okay, so similar to the structure, the scaffolds that we put together for the pre-service teachers when thinking about working with their own data that they had collected and trying to create opportunity to norm set that we work with data and we're not perfect at it from the beginning, and we don't want to be one and doneing with our data visualizations. We really want to lean into that exploration. We created scaffolded supports and resources for pre-service teachers when working with data they've accessed from online data portals. So I'm going to talk through what these are so that you can use them with your future students, your pre-service teachers in your classroom. But the intention here is to, again, create another scaffolded way where we can get the pre-service teachers looking to each other as peers, working together, troubleshooting together, and really normalizing that the expectation is not that you get this right out the bat, but the expectation is that you talk to each other and you work together and think about how to make sense of data in different pieces like that. So all of the pre-service teachers went off, they collected their own data, they accessed their own data, they made their own different decisions on time frame, location, variables to include. You can narrow this down, but it's good to have a little bit of choice in there for the pre-service teachers as they're, again, building their confidence and understanding of how to make these decisions when working with data. So then we put them together into small groups and partner groups or groups of 3 and had them share about their experiences, because it could be, there's a whole range of experiences we can have when we get into online portals. So trying to create that space for that. So questions that we ask them to reflect out with one another, that you can ask your pre-service teachers to reflect out with one another, is like, what variables did you explore? How easy or difficult was it for you to find data that interested you. Like, right? Sometimes what we want and what's actually there, there's a disconnect, and sort of normalizing that that's part of the process. And how do we kind of work through that setback or frustration and keep that resilience up to kind of keep ticking through, to either be like, okay, it's not exactly what I want, but I can adjust to be excited about this, or it's not exactly what I want. I want to keep looking for it. How do I keep looking for it? And or like, what locations did you investigate? Close to home, far away, regional, local, if there is a spatial component, right? Just sort of kind of create space to be like, how did it go? What did you decide to pull? Where aspects? These questions, obviously the last one can be adapted if you're not using spatial data in the data portals that your students are working with. But just creating a space to be like, okay, let's just sort of acknowledge how things went, do a little bit of reflection. Then working with a partner, thinking about, okay, now let's dive in. So there's one partner, there's two groups. One is going to be the lead, and then the other will be the support in this partner share out. So the lead partner is going to share their initial data visualization, data exploration visualization that they made from their online data that they downloaded. And they'll show the graph, they'll discuss what their question was that they were trying to pursue, they'll show their data set, right? All the pieces, like the nuts and the bolts, the under the hood. And then just to sort of give some context of like, what are we working with? How did I visualize it? What was I trying to ask? The support partner will ask any clarifying questions, what doesn't make sense, discuss what was similar or different about their experience, start to provide some questions or some feedback, and then they'll switch, right? So they both have this opportunity to kind of help give an insight in to their process, not the product, not the like, here's my graph and it's done, but the process of working with the data that they collected from an online data portal and how they visualized it in their initial data explorations of it. It can be helpful to pull everybody back together, like out of their partner groups, and sort of check in, think about like what was interesting from their discussions, what were some shared aha moments, what were some shared points of struggles. Again, we're norm setting that this takes time, this takes practice, this takes iteration, and a lot of us have a lot of similar struggles, and a lot of us we had some aha moments of, oh, that was similar. Oh, I was so struggling with that. And then my partner helped me figure out this piece, or they did it this way and I hadn't even thought about that. That peer-to-peer instruction and starting to see each other as experts and supports is important for our pre-service teachers, right? They're a cohort going through. When they go out into their future classrooms, we want them both to feel that ability to connect with their colleagues in their departments and their schools where they get placed, and their cohort of going through the teacher prep program, right? These sort of two levels of community that they can rely on and reach out to and look for support. So we're kind of normalizing that. And this is how it goes when we work with data. So exactly what we want for them, what they're teaching, is also how it goes when we're working with data. And then here's the next piece. So similar to in module 2, when we were working with our own data, we did our gallery tour, we received feedback, and we revised. Here, the scaffold that we have is they've talked with one another, they've seen some aha moments, and then we jump back into revise. And this builds off of sort of the concept of partner coding, where one person, the lead, they'll take lead, and both partners are going to be working on that data set, revising the visualization that the lead person initially developed and revised. Two brains are better than one, sort of thinking through that, and how do we work together to make some changes, like what kind of visualization that they were using, or the range of data that they were using, or the variables that they were including, so that they can better get at their testable question, or sort of better revise what they were seeing or wanting the story that they wanted to tell. And this offers opportunity of those at moments that inevitably will come up. We will get stuck. It is tricky working with data. This takes some resilience. Now, it should not be so tricky that we're just sort of wallowing and getting total cognitive overload and overwhelm. This is why we do this as like a partner coding-esque type of activity, because they have each other to talk through and troubleshoot and work together as they are doing that work. And then when they finish doing the visualization revision for the first partner, they switch and do it for the other. So that not everybody, so that everybody gets an opportunity. That can happen either in this moment, it can happen in a future moment, right? But we just want to make sure that we're not always kind of leaning towards certain pre-service teachers getting all the activity. What I should also say is this is absolutely a structure that they can use in their future classrooms for their students. So we're using the structure scaffold to help our pre-service teachers, and it's a structure scaffold that they can use in their future classrooms, either with data that the students have collected themselves or that they've collected from online data portals. So I should say both the gallery tour in module 2 and this sort of partner revisions in module 3, they can be used with different data sets. You can interchange them back and forth, different pieces. They're strategies we use with our pre-service teachers and strategies they can use with their future students on how to norm set and normalize group work and collaboration and partnership and peer-to-peer learning and support around working with data. After those revisions have happened, bring everybody back together and sort of check in on how's the process going? Like, how's it going working together? Revising a graph. For some of our pre-service teachers, this will be totally new. And that can be tricky and a little challenging. And it is good to norm set. This is a great active way for collaboration and partnership and team, like group work together. Not just group work for group work's sake, but really leveraging each other's expertise and knowledge. You can think about, if they had been doing it in analog, how would it have been different if they were doing it in a graphing program, or if they were in a interactive graphing program, how would it have been different if they were using a spreadsheet program like Google Sheets and Excel, different things like that. So the questions are up to you to sort of refine and iterate based on the circumstances of your situation, but creating a spot at the end to kind of, okay, let's come back, let's think about it. You might even want to be, pull back even more, a broader reflection, sort of thinking, creating space for that. We're not only going through the steps of the process to execute them, but we want to create those moments, those metacognition moments of what am I doing, both for our own learning as pre-service teachers as they're building their data skills, and as that key critical reflection point of, and what might this mean for my future classroom? How would I want to create space and opportunities for my future students to be able to do things like that, like this as well, to build these skills early on and refine and work towards them. So, some takeaways. Using data others have collected creates different opportunities than working with learner-generated data alone. Both are important. We need both in our K-12 spaces, our STEM K-12 spaces. So therefore, we need to acknowledge and honor that it can be tricky working with professionally collected data and lean into some scaffolded ways to structure that, some good repositories of like what are more classroom ready data portals versus not, things like that. Finding fair data sets is important, similar to creating space and time to organize and work with the data. So we can't expect our pre-service teachers just to intuit and understand how to do this. We need to sort of help fill in the pieces, the surrounds, that at least we were finding in our own classrooms, as well as the classrooms across the country as we've been implementing the last 3 years. Our pre-service teachers don't have much of this context and background. And that peer learning and support is a great way to have students build their own self-efficacy of working with data, not always looking at us as their professors, and therefore creating a structure where they will go into their future classrooms and create a structure where their students are constantly looking to them for the answers, but that they're really creating this space and opportunity and leaning into, this is valuable for me, it will be valuable for my future students, and it is valuable for me to build this community that I can then leverage of other classroom teachers once I am in the classroom. So, different ways that we put in structures and components in this ADVizE project to get at this. There are opportunities when we work with data other people have collected And we are just going to acknowledge that it is not always easy and there's some struggle to it, but how can we structure it in a way that it is productive struggle and we are supporting and scaffolding those opportunities for our pre-service teachers, not just spin out and give up kind of struggle, not what we want. So hopefully those are some ideas that you can take forward into your course, into your classroom. Thanks for playing along, playing with some data, always super fun. I'll see you in the next lesson. Have a good day.